Fantastic. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Alalem Adefris. I'm the VP of Policy and Advocacy at Catalyst Miami. And we're so happy to have you all participate in this community op-ed training. We have some amazing guests and collaborators today. And so I will have them introduce themselves in a minute. But I just wanted to share a little bit about what we're going to go through today. So we're doing the introduction right now. we'll introduce ourselves. We'll talk about tips and tricks, general tips and tricks for writing the op-ed. We'll talk about how to give a pitch and what to say in the email when you send it out. And then we'll discuss what are some opportunities for publishing, and then do a Q&A. This will not be a writing workshop. We're just gonna give a general overview and some really helpful tips and tricks. We have collaborators from the Miami Herald, WLRN, and several other nonprofits and former employees at different media markets around Miami, so and around the country. So we're really excited to have them. And hopefully, if you all like this, we can set up a time to do a second version, which will be more of a writing workshop. So, all right, with that, I'll have our presenters introduce themselves briefly. I'll first have Alex Harris from Miami Herald.
Hey there, I'm Alex Harris. I cover climate change and hurricanes at the Miami Herald.
Great. How about Hannah?
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Malice. I'm from the Center for American Progress on our Energy and Environment team.
Great. Then we have Joey.
He's not going to be able to make it today.
Okay. How about Lance?
Hey there, Lance Dixon. I'm the digital editor at WLRN. Some folks in call might also know me formerly as the director of the new Tropic.
Thank you, Lance. Nadej?
Hi, I'm Nadej with Community Justice Project, Director of Community Research and Storytelling, formerly of WLRN.
Wonderful. And then I introduced myself. I'm Zalalem at Catalyst Miami. We're a local anti-poverty nonprofit here in Miami-Dade County. And last, but certainly not least, we have Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy Ancrum. I'm the editorial page editor of the Miami Herald.
So I just want to give a big thank you to our presenters. Really appreciate your collaboration on this. And so we'll just dive right in. Such a slide. Wonderful. So I'll kick it over to Lance.
Hey, can everyone hear me okay? My earbuds died. Okay, cool. So what is an op-ed? That's the reason why we're all here today. And so an op-ed is a piece that's typically published by a newspaper or magazine or online news outlet, which expresses the opinion of an author that's usually not affiliated with the publication's editorial board, because that editorial board will, publish their own editorials. And Nancy can obviously speak to that a bit more a little bit later. And so, yeah, that's just a general overview.
Great. Hannah, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and so in addition to writing op-eds, you can also write something to your local paper or any paper called a letter to the editor. Sometimes you'll hear folks refer to them as LTEs. That's what they're talking about. And unlike an op-ed, which is usually, we're going to get into the details, it's usually like 600 to 800 words, and LTE is much shorter. You want it to stick to about 200 words. But conveying, important ideas, it's like really great to get an LTE placed, but you have to do it pretty succinctly. And so, yeah, brevity is key.
Thanks, Hannah. And so I guess the reason why we're all here, and you may be wondering, why is this so important? And for me, that reason is if we don't shape our own narrative, it gets shaped for us. Like if we're not telling our own stories, someone else, a lot of these lovely people who are fantastic at their jobs that are presenting on this call, these journalists and reporters. They present our stories in partnership and for us, but it's something really special to be able to have your opinion out there in your own words. And you know, a lot of people obviously read the newspaper and read all these publications, so you have the opportunity to influence policy, influence perception, and to bring some new ideas forth. I know Alex wanted to add on to this point.
Right, and another benefit, Zala makes the best point here, that you get to cover things in the way you see them and the way you experience them. You get to have everyone experience your perspective. But even from a journalism perspective, you can only cover the same topic so many times. And this is just kind of the cherry on top of the sundae when you talk about a certain thing. I obviously write a lot about climate change, and there's only so much of my time I can write stories. So when you have op-eds or letters to the editor, or editorials from the staff at the paper, that is additional amplification of an issue that you think is important. So it's a great idea to get in there and talk about the things you care about.
Great.
Sorry, one moment. So yeah, let's talk about some tips and tricks. Excuse me. For when you want to get something published, and Nancy, feel free to jump in at any point if you want to talk a little bit about this. But generally, you want to keep a list of things you might want to talk about. So everybody kind of has one main issue they care the most about, but there's lots of different facets to it. You want to think, okay, I care about solar panels. Okay, I care about climate gentrification. Okay, I care about all these different aspects. And I would be passionate enough to write a letter to the editor or an op-ed about any of them. And keep an eye on our op-ed pages. You can view them on the Miami Herald website. You can view them on any news outlet. Look up, the Charlotte Observer op-ed, and you can find that section. You can find those letters to the editors. You can take a look. What are other people in my community saying about these issues? What is the newspaper saying about these issues? Do my views perfectly align with that? Do they differ? Is this a good place? I see they're talking a lot about the teacher perspective of going back to schools. I think the student perspective isn't really highlighted. Use that to come up with creative ideas to find your hook. What can you offer that you don't see there? And the best way to figure out where those openings are is to be informed of what the playing field looks like, what other writers are putting out there, and what else the community is hearing. Because maybe you think, oh, no one's ever written or talked about my perspective, so I'm uniquely capable of sharing that. And that's really where a letter to the editor can shine. And we all are lucky enough to have editors if you're a professional writer most of the time. But use your friends and your family's editors. Go find whoever, got the English degree in your family. Your mom is really excellent at writing the Christmas card at the end of the year. Have other people read it and find out if they, if they perceive the issue in the same way you do, if they understand your emotion, if the issue comes across clearly. Read it widely, because your friends and your family are going to be your best first readers, and they're going to be, representative of the audience when you get things published.
All right, absolutely. One thing that I really have been insisting upon as the editorial page editor is that people write, that people call me before they plop an op-ed into my inbox, which happens, I've just been deluged since coronavirus, since George Floyd. It's such a heavy news cycle that anyone and everyone who has something to say is saying it, and we can't run it all. It's not all that interesting. It's not all that original thinking. What I've been asking people to do, or asking of people, is to write from their point of expertise, especially if they're going to pitch an op-ed, which is about, Hannah's right, it's about, we like about 650 to 700 words because we have limited space in print. And for example, I had an op-ed, I had already committed to running it. Otherwise, I think I would have asked him to shorten it to a letter. And I've just gotten kind of hardcore and said, you need to cut that to 200 words that are tightly focused. But this is a person who is a public health professional And he chose to write an op-ed about learning to love one another and to listen to one another. And it was a nice sentiment, but it should have been in a letter. I should have stood my ground and just made it a letter. And then asked him to write, you're a public health professional, write about what's going on as far as COVID-19. So no matter what is written, whether it's a letter or an op-ed, I really ask, especially with op-eds, that you write from an area of expertise because of the space that we give you to explain and to elaborate and to tell a story that you think a wider audience should know. Letters, I let people, I think people can just vent their spleen if they're mad at something or really happy to see a turn of events. Yeah, just put that in a shorter letter.
Great, thanks, Nancy. I switched the list. Alex, maybe you can continue walking through the other ones, and I love this collaboration too.
Yeah, and to bounce off what Nancy just said, expertise is absolutely the most important thing here, because you are offering that unique perspective people don't see, and you're adding authority to what you write. So another good way to add authority to what you write is you think, I have the lived experience, but wouldn't it be nice to have an academic, a politician, or somebody, who could speak to another angle of this? So you can partner with them. And sometimes those partnerships can produce some really, really great products. And I think there's a question from David who said, should we call Nancy before we email an op-ed to her? I think, Nancy, you said yes.
Yes.
We should call her first.
You want my phone number?
We're going to have it on a handout later, but if you want to offer it right now, go for it.
305-753-6658. You can also email.
The interpreter, would you guys be able to send that in the chat?
Sure.
I'll type it in right now.
And you know what? And also my email address, which, and Alex knows what that is. As she writes, she does make a really good point about make writing personal, tell your personal story. And I don't mean to suggest when I say people should write from their area of expertise that, they necessarily need to have doctor in front of their name or PhD, behind their name. I've gotten some very good op-eds of people writing their personal stories in light of George Floyd's death. No. This was in light of Ahmaud Arbery's death, who was shot to death as he was running. From a Black attorney, I got a very good op-ed about his thoughts, his feelings, and his fears now as he runs through, the quiet streets of Miami suburbia. It was excellent. I didn't ask for it. I didn't solicit it. It did plop into my email, but I was happy that it had.
Right, and that was a really powerful op-ed. I remember reading it. And one of the things that made it so powerful was that personal language. It wasn't talking about policy necessarily, or it was talking about, your personal experiences with something. And if you are writing about policy, one of the ways to make it readable and make sure that people can carry on with what you're trying to explain is keep it, keep that jargon, keep that wonk out of it. I know there's a lot of scientific policy. I mean, policy has a great deal of influence on our lives. It's very important. You can't undermine that. But if you're able to explain it like you would to a child, or you would to your grandparent, or you would to someone who has no expertise in the factor, think about when you're writing, like, how can I say this to someone who has no idea what I'm talking about, and that they will be able to completely understand it and maybe feel your way on the policy. So if you come back to how can I explain this simply, that's always going to help you write a really good letter. And yeah, this is Zelalem brought this up when we were brainstorming here, and I'm sure Nancy gets this sometimes too. Some people are used to, when they're citing their sources, to do it, in an MLA kind of way and write a citation. I'm talking about this paper. Here's the name of the author. Here's where you can reference it. Here's the specific page. In journalism, you don't usually do that. You can usually hyperlink to, if there's scientific paper you're talking about or a book you're referencing, you can just link to a place to find it. That's generally an easier way to get your point across here, especially if you are talking about policy or science or something like that. And paying attention to word count, very big deal. Like Nancy said, it helps tremendously if you come in with 200 words to your letter to the editor. If you hand her 1,000 words and say this is a letter, rarely do I think they cut it for you. There's not enough time to go around.
Absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know, Nancy, if this works for you, but I know in other outlets sometimes they always need some help coming up with a headline, especially maybe for an op-ed instead of a letter to the editor. If you can just even put 5 or 6 words, just something short maybe, that sort of sums up what you're trying to express. They may not use it, but hey, they might. You might save some person a lot of time who has to come up with a little headline for every single thing, and you get a little more chance to shape what you're writing.
Right. If you can't come up with a headline, it means that you might not be writing as clearly as you think. So go back and read that and make sure you've made your point.
And I see a question in the chat real quick before we move on to the pitch about if the draft op-ed is too long. Nancy, if someone sends you a draft op-ed that's too long, do you cut it or do you ask them to cut it?
If I decide that I want to run it, I send it back to them to cut. I don't cut it. It's just a matter of bandwidth.
And a general take for op-eds is usually 600-700 words, somewhere around there. Letter to the editor, 200 to 300 words. We found in the handout we're going to share later, different outlets have different standards, but that's around when you should be looking for.
True.
Great, so now we'll kick it over to Nancy. This was your the section we had for you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
No, we love it. Thank you.
We work better as a team. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I love the teamwork.
Everything you had to say. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, this is all you, if you'd like it.
Okay, so I see why now. Tell them why your story is relevant?
Yes, this is for the pitch email. Like when they're writing, I know you said to call, that you asked people to call you, but if they're writing an email, what should be in that simple email?
Oh, absolutely. Simple email about what they want to write about and specifically what their point is. What are they telling someone to do something? Is there a policy that needs to be examined by a county commission or the state legislature? What is the point? And why is it relevant? Why should the broader community know this thing? And that's, I think those are the two marching orders that I really like to give, but also it has to be well written. Unfortunately, editors, so many editors just don't have the same amount of time they might have had maybe a decade ago to work with an op-ed writer and to help them better craft their piece and make their point. No, I will kick something back to someone and with suggestions as to, you know, you need to make this sharper, or you're rambling here, or you're repeating yourself. Let's tighten this up and stick to the point. I like to give someone guidance. If it's an op-ed I definitely want to run, a topic I definitely want to give a broader airing to, but it's on the writer.
Right. Cool. And we had a few other things, just, you know, to be very basic, what should be included in that, and an example email. I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but, and I actually had a question about relevant credentials. I'm wondering, is it helpful if people talk about like why they should be published as a writer, or do you kind of look at it at the quality of the writing alone?
I do like to see credentials. And again, I don't mean degrees and honorifics. I just want to know that you know what you're talking about because you have studied it, you do work in this particular area, or you have lived it, or all three. but I don't want people, especially with op-eds, just writing their thoughts. They need to have a point. And all of this does need to be included: contact information, their full name, and the same actually with a letter, because every once in a while, more frequently than I like, I will call a letter writer to ask, do you know what you're talking about? People often write letters that are full of statistics and numbers, and I don't know what they're quoting. I don't know if they know what they're talking about. And so I call them and ask more nicely than this, do you know what you're talking about? You know, where did they get the numbers? Where, you know, and sometimes people are writing from their professional knowledge, but don't want to do that, especially don't want that included in their signature, especially if they work for government. You know, they don't want to appear to be writing on behalf of their job, which they might not be allowed to do.
Great, thank you.
I'm so sorry. The interpreters are gonna switch now, just to let
Okay,
you know.
I'll unpin the picture and repin with the second interpreter. Let me change the slide, and I'll do that. No problem. I'm gonna kick it over to Nadej, and I'm gonna figure this out on the Zoom.
Before we move to Nadej real fast, there was a really good question I think that I would love maybe Nancy could answer. Nancy, do you think people should say in their letter, I need a deadline, you have to respond to me by X date, or I'm going to pitch it to someone else? How long should they wait? Is there a rule of thumb on that?
No, unfortunately, my inbox runneth over, so I do miss a lot, or I get to some op-eds that have been submitted rather late in the game. I hate to admit, but it's true. What usually happens is someone will send something. If they don't hear from me, especially if it's really timely, if they don't hear from me because I haven't seen it, in a couple of days, I do not mind being poked. I do not mind getting a follow-up email that says, hey, you know, so they can do that. And it does, it you know, kind of jerks my little leash, and I pay attention, and and I can give them a yes or a no, you know. But no one should take my silence for automatic rejection. Sometimes it is, especially if it's an op-ed that comes from way out of town, or maybe an op-ed that's been sent to every newspaper. I don't respond. I usually don't respond to those, but I don't mind being poked. And I'll answer much more immediately.
All right, this was a great segue, so I'll kick it over to Nadej. And of course, any one of our speakers can add to this.
Sorry, I was on mute. So what happens if you don't get published? So there are a few options, one of which is, you know, what Nancy said, which is, you know, you can feel free to be persistent and follow up with folks, because it could be just the email was swamped, or, you know, the focus is on something else right now. Some other options, let's say you can't get in the Herald, is Twitter. If you're on Twitter, I use Twitter a lot, both, you know, when I was a reporter, but not necessarily because I was working on a particular story, but to get information out there. So creating a Twitter thread, something, writing like your story as a beginning, middle, and end as a Twitter thread, noting that it is a thread, and sometimes tagging news outlets or reporters or individuals who care about that topic can further amplify it. One thing I can say as an insider in newsrooms is sometimes, you know, you don't know what people are talking about in the community, and you'll see a Twitter thread and you're like, oh, that looks interesting. And so while maybe you didn't get an op-ed, a reporter does reach out to you now to, like, you know, do something about the Twitter thread that you did. But same concept around an op-ed is like, is it well written? Does it have a beginning, middle, and end? Is it saying something that maybe hasn't been said before, or is it coming from a perspective that the person knows what they're talking about and maybe it's not just repeating information that's already out there? So Twitter threads are one way to do that. Instagram stories also. We're seeing a lot of this right now. One example is New World School of the Arts Black alumni just created a Twitter page specifically to get the voices out there of how Black alum were treated at the school from its onset till today. And they're writing it as like Instagram stories. So in all of the little Black caption blocks, a picture block is a story, and you can swipe to read a story. Like, so one post is a whole story from, you know, Nadej, class of 03, or I'm a New World dropout, so not class of 03, but but you can get a full story and, you know, interact with it that way. So, I mean, really it's how do you amplify storytelling and narratives outside of traditional media if it is not possible to get it in the newspaper. Another good tip, Facebook as well, but Facebook only if your page is public so that it can be shareable. If you don't want your page to be public, maybe consider having someone with a public page share your story, because that is another way, especially within local circles, things share. So considering sharing that on Facebook as well. Another, you know, WLRN is on the line, and Lance may be able to say more on this, but it's not an op-ed, but get to know the producers on the local public radio shows. For example, you have the Florida Roundup that airs every Friday, which is more kind of like op-ed style, like where, you know, you're talking about issues. Most of the times it's like journalists, politicians, and community organizers who are invited to that show. So getting to know producers and letting them know your expertise, right? That, you know, I work along this stuff, and like everything else, it's like building a really. As we build relationships with folks in the community, you want to build relationships with like a producer and find out who the producers are and what they do, because I think that will give you like a clear idea, like, how do I get on a show? And that can be a whole separate session, you know, not this one, but getting to know the producers of the Florida Roundup, of This Week in South Florida, which is Glenna Milberg's show with Michael Putney, when they have a round table, so that they know, like, okay, your expertise is housing. You work around issues on health disparities, because there isn't like, you know, one resource page to find all of this stuff within the community. So if you want to build those relationships also, because sometimes, you know, the Herald can only hold so much. So maybe it could be, you know, being on one of the live shows on WLRN, like the Florida Roundup, or Sundial, which airs daily Monday through Thursdays, not on Fridays. But typically it's knowing who the producers are and making sure that they know who you are and the work that you do is how you get invitations onto those shows, which is the equivalent of a public radio op-ed in some ways. So you're not writing something, you're invited as a guest. And blogs. So CJP recently just started a Medium page. And I have found Medium to be really strong in getting information out there around movement work, justice issues, and just journalism. Reveal is on that platform, which is one of my favorite investigative reporting podcasts. They use Medium as their outlet, but CJP just started a Medium page. It's medium.com/CJP Miami. And what we are starting to do on the page is publish issues around justice, equality, and movement work in Miami-Dade. So it's like things that, you know, we may not have pitched as an op-ed, but we feel like it's like content, it's shareable, and want people to have access to it. One of the posts was 40 years after the McDuffie riots, Miami still protests against police violence, where we put into context like the historical stories around police violence in Miami and what we're seeing today. We just went live this afternoon with a new post that we're gonna push out tomorrow morning, written by a local transgender woman, Imani Castillo, who wrote about housing disparities around COVID-19 and Black trans women and what it means to have an emergency fund for Black trans women. And that coincides with a rent party that we are coordinating with her on. So if you're an organization or even an individual who does work and you already have content, consider what it means if you have a website to already to put out your own content, right? Whether it's a blog or maybe a newsletter. Newsletters are also very helpful if you have a newsletter, but like, how do you make it usable, shareable? Especially now in a digital age where, you know, good content, whether it's in a newspaper, on a Medium post, or even a Twitter thread, has a lot of reach. I saw a question on like how to pitch WLRN. It can be very simple, you know, just like reaching out, again, knowing who to reach out to. So it might be worth like calling up or emailing one of the reporters, be like, hey, this is what I'm interested in, if they have the bandwidth, or, you know, maybe Lance after the fact can like do a sheet like this on how to contact WLRN and Zelalem can share it. But knowing who folks are, it doesn't have to be an essay, just like a paragraph on what you're working on. And, you know, keep in mind that this is radio. So whatever you're pitching, you're going to have to be able to talk about, or a person is going to have, especially right now, like virtual access to record themselves to send it to them. So, but yeah, it doesn't have to be too involved.
Great. So I have, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to know if I could add to that really quickly.
Yes, of course.
So, you know, just speaking to Nadej's point, one thing for sure to familiarize yourself with the producers on shows is that there's sort of like a bulletin or sort of like a roll call of the producers on the shows at the end of each program. So if you stick through to the whole hour, you can get to know the names of those folks, and then, you know, just look at their emails or look at their names and correlate them to that on the staff page on our website. Also, I'll, you know, share my contact information. I think that's coming on the next slide anyway. We're going to talk about that and share that. But yeah, it doesn't have to be like a particular press kit or anything like that. Really just, you know, reaching out. And also we're active on all of, you know, the social platforms. So even if it's just something as informal as sending a DM, like we might not see it immediately, but if nothing else, you know, that's another way to reach out, and then I can pass the word, or our engagement team can pass the word along to those producers who work on those shows.
All right, so slide into the DMs is Lance's. So I have my contact information here. I just wanted to share, I'm sure people are wondering, we'll be sending out the slides. Everyone that is on this registered, you know, registered via email through the Zoom link. So we'll be sending out the slides to that registration list, and we're also creating a document that will have more details for each outlet. So for Sun Sentinel, Miami Herald, the specific instructions and advice for those specific papers and media outlets as well. So we're going to work on that the next few days. We'll add in the information around WLRN and NPR, and we'll have that sent to you all. And I'll also, making sure it's okay with all of our speakers. If they're okay with it, I will share their contact information as well. So you will have all of this information and more, and contact information on that document in your email inbox shortly. With that being said, I'm so happy that so many people were asking questions throughout, and we got to get to those, but we'll have an open Q&A portion for any additional questions that you'll have. And so I'll let it kick it off, and then any of our presenters can answer the Q&A. And actually, I need to unshare my screen so I can see the chat, but I don't know if there's any in there that you all would just want to pick out and start answering. We can do that too.
I guess we could just address this question in the chat out loud. The one coming from David. As Alex and Nadej both said, yeah, there's really no such thing as a slow news day with COVID-19 and everything else that's kind of happening in the world. But definitely, yeah, just feel free to pitch whenever. I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a worst day of the week. I don't know if any of you all want to speak to that. Yeah, I mean, essentially it's just, we'll do our best to see these things when we can, and then reach out and follow up.
I'd say probably not a weekend. There are fewer people looking at things on the weekend. And if you have the opportunity, early morning's usually better. It's the top of news inboxes before you have a chance to do much else.
So I see this question about the national, actually this might not be for me, but I will, it says, do you also cover or accept op-eds for national issues or mostly exclusively local? So I'm assuming those are for our journalists on the call, but I will say we will send also instructions from another website for several national papers for their op-ed instructions in addition to the local. So I don't know if anyone else wants to take that question about national.
National issues.
Mm-hmm.
I'll run an op-ed on national issues. Well, we have so much access to national op-eds that we have access to from syndicated columns, regular columnists, that usually I look for a local person whose area will be impacted by a national policy. Affordable housing, we need funds down here, transportation especially, we're public transportation heavily dependent on federal funds. So if there's a local corridor or something that can't be constructed because of the lack of federal funds, we'll kind of back into national issues that way.
Great. There's another set of questions around if you think there's a particular expertise missing from the submissions generally. And also, I guess along that same line, what topic do you wish you received more letters and op-eds about?
It's not so much topics for me. I really wish more younger people would write, who are entering the workforce, trying to enter the workforce, are in it and are seeing issues just differently from a generational perspective. They don't have to address a generational perspective. I just want them to write, their take. I would love for younger people to write for the page.
Great, and we're taking questions in the chat. I'm wondering if anyone else has any others, or if people are on the phone, I want to give an opportunity for those calling in to unmute yourselves and ask a question.
Let's see, someone just asked me if there's a best time of day. Not the morning, not the nighttime. You know what's even best? A text. A text is great. Tell me who you are and just briefly, tell me what's up. Because, you know why? Because I don't answer my cell phone if you're not in my contacts and you don't, I don't know your number. I will wait for you to leave a voicemail. But a text, it buzzes, I look, and just tell me who you are and what it is you might want to pitch or talk about.
Great. Okay, so we have this question again, like about giving a deadline when you shop your op-ed around. Do you mind repeating your answer?
I'm going to elaborate on the answer. It depends on if it is pegged to something that's going to happen. Is there a commission vote coming up? Is there a congressional vote coming up? Or is some state agency soliciting public comments, and you want to encourage people to comment on whatever, but the window is closing. So, that in and of itself is a deadline, and a deadline that I need to know of. And so if that deadline is approaching, yeah, definitely poke me if you haven't heard from me. And but otherwise, again, there's not really a deadline. There are, as I said, there are things that just sit in my basket, my inbox, because I haven't seen it. So just send me an email, just saying, you know, get it together and look at my thing.
All right. We have a question about how quickly can you run a letter to the editor once you receive it?
You know, it's easier to get a letter to the editor in than it is an op-ed. There's a really clogged pipeline of op-eds just because we've been deluged with stuff. And so, you know, letters can get in sometimes the next day if it's interesting enough, if it's relevant enough, if it actually fills, you know, the last bit of space. You wouldn't believe the letters that I run just because, oh my God, it just fills out the space. But you know, within a few days, I would say, if we're going to run it. And because we get so many letters, we don't always run it. And if we do run a letter, we have a 30-day rule. And so we will not run a letter from the same writer for the next 30 days.
Great. Any other questions? Yeah, you can. Oh, wait. I'm trying to unmute you.
Hi, I asked in the chat, but I was just wondering if, so I know Nancy said that it's good to send text, but I was wondering if it's smart to send an email with kind of the information that you mentioned and be like, hi, my name is so-and-so, I sent you an email about this, hope to hear back soon, or is that overkill?
No, that's fine. I mean, are you saying that's the poke? Is that the follow-up email?
Yeah, like
Yes.
it would be like a text to reference like, oh, I've sent an email in.
You can send me a text or an email. The second email, you know, gets me moving if I haven't seen it the first time.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Anyone else? All right. Well, we have this recording. So anyone that came late, you'll be able to watch the whole thing or share it. And we'll be sending you written down information. We're gonna probably collaborate with each other and make sure we got everything on the documents. Everyone will get that as well. And I hope this was helpful, and I hope we have even more community kind of grassroots voice in the papers submitting these letters and op-eds. I think that would be lovely to see. And thank you so much for our panelists. I have been so grateful for your collaboration and your willingness to share. I know we had such a high level of interest. I know we're gonna have so many people watch the recording, and this is gonna be something so helpful for our community going forward. So just thank you so much.